Hello everyone and welcome. Thank you for joining. Well, in this video we're taking a look at heavy grenade launchers. Now, with the release of Beyond Light in Season 12, we've only been given two, those being Crowd Pleaser and Battue, if I'm pronouncing that right. Of course, there is also Salvation's Grip, but I've not bothered to test for that. So I'll be taking a look at a few perks on the new arrivals and comparing their DPS to two favourites from last season, Interference 6 and Berenger's Memory. Now this video will have a small weapon pool, so it's only those four tested, but I have looked at different perks and combinations with the exception of Berenger's Memory, which has been tested with Pulse Monitor and Demolitionist only. There'll be no pairing with other weapons in this video, so no snipers or Wither Horde, it's just these grenade launchers on their own. So all testing was conducted with a single grenade launcher loader mod. Every weapon has spike grenades and a backup mag mod, and for those with field prep, reload times were measured while crouched in order to benefit from the perk's reload speed buff. Also, again for those with field prep, the extra ammo in reserves have been taken into consideration. There was a very small difference in the total damage per round between each of the 120 RPM grenade launchers, which I assume is down to velocity, but it won't have a large impact on overall DPS as it was only small. So as always, we'll take a look at each weapon and perk combination individually, run over the numbers, and then put them all together on the graph. Any number discrepancies compared to previous testing for Berenger's Memory and Interference 6 will be discussed while looking at those weapons. So first up, Battue. This is an adaptive frame and therefore fires at 120 RPM. It holds 17 in reserves with nothing to boost this, 5 in the magazine or 7 with a backup mag mod, and reload time came in around 2.7 seconds with a single loader mod equipped. Now it doesn't have a large selection of perks that help increase sustained DPS, so it's been tested with Pulse Monitor and then Clown Cartridge, with both examples including spike grenades and a backup mag mod as already mentioned. Taking a look at Pulse Monitor first, where for the first magazine, when you're down to the final round, fire it at the ground in front of you enough to deplete your shield but not kill you. This will fully reload the weapon, and now you can empty the second magazine of 7 rounds. Even as a 100 recovery Warlock, this isn't long enough to regenerate and proc Pulse Monitor again, so after you've emptied the second mag, it's a normal reload where you'll then have 3 rounds remaining. Now, if you're in a Warlock's well though, for example, you can proc it twice and it's much easier to do. But I haven't tested it in a well, as damage will increase, which means I'll have to test every weapon while stood in a Warlock's well, which I don't want to do because I want base numbers. Anyway, damage per round is 19,904. 16 of those will do damage against the target, as 1 was used to proc Pulse Monitor, so total damage is 318,464. Time to fire all rounds using this method is 10.2 seconds, therefore DPS is 31,222. And Battue with Clown Cartridge. The minimum you can hold in the magazine now is 8, with that number having the potential to reach 11 after a reload. With 17 in reserves, most of the time you'll be able to empty everything in just 2 magazines. For this example, I've assumed 8 in the first, followed by 9 in the second. Of course, you could be unlucky and have 8 in the second magazine, which means you'll have a third magazine of just 1, but that is unlikely. If you start with 9 or more in the first magazine, you're guaranteed to empty all reserves in the second magazine. Damage remains the same at 19,904 per round, but total damage is based on 17 now, so that comes in a little higher than Pulse Monitor at 338,368. Time to empty 17 rounds is also 10.2 seconds, therefore DPS is 33,173. Now, the reason the time to empty all rounds is exactly the same for both perks is because if you execute the Pulse Monitor method perfectly and maintain that full fire rate, you empty all 17 rounds with only 1 reload, the same as Clown Cartridge. Next is Crowd Pleaser. This is also an adaptive frame and fires at 120 RPM. Unlike Battue though, it can only hold 16 in reserves and requires field prep in order to hold 17. Magazine size is 5 or 7 with a backup mag mod, and reload time was the same, averaging 2.7 seconds, but that does go down to 2.05 seconds with field prep when crouching. Perks tested were Field Prep with Demolitionist, Clown Cartridge and Pulse Monitor with Demolitionist. Now, Clown Cartridge wasn't tested with Demolitionist as reloading by throwing a grenade doesn't proc Clown Cartridge. And without it, that overfilled magazine, you can't fire all reserves in only 2 magazines, but rather 3. So, starting with Field Prep and Demolitionist. For this method, once you've emptied the first magazine of 7, throw a grenade to reload. Then empty the second magazine of 7, and when you're reloading for the second time, make sure you crouch to benefit from Field Prep's reload speed buff. Damage per round is slightly higher than Battue at 20,073, although this did have slightly higher velocity, meaning the damage for 17 rounds is 341,241. The grenade used was a Warlock's fusion grenade, which did 20,560 damage. Of course, this can change depending on class and grenade type. This means total damage is 361,808, and total time to do that came in at 10.58 seconds. Therefore DPS is 34,197. Now it's crowd pleaser with clown cartridge. The magazine can vary from a minimum of 8 up to a maximum of 11, but with no field prep now, total reserves is just 16. This means that you are guaranteed to empty all reserves in just 2 magazines. With damage per round the same at 20,073, total damage is 321,168, with time to do that coming in at 9.7 seconds. Therefore DPS is 33,110. And finally, it's Pulse Monitor and Demolitionist. For the method tested here, after the first magazine, fire the final round at the ground to deplete your shield, proccing Pulse Monitor and reloading the weapon. Then after emptying the second magazine, throw a grenade to reload. This will leave you with 2 in the final mag. Damage per round is of course still the same at 20,073, therefore total damage is 321,662, which is based on 16 rounds and the damage from the grenade. Time to do this is only 8.53 seconds, therefore DPS is 37,709. And now we'll take a look at Interference 6. This is also an adaptive frame and therefore fires at 120 RPM. It can hold 16 rounds in total, but with field prep that goes up to 18. Base magazine size is 5, which goes up to 7 with a backup mag mod, and if you have clown cartridge as well, it's then anything from 8 to 11 rounds. Reload was the same as crowd pleaser at around 2.7 seconds with a single grenade loader mod, but decreasing to 2.05 seconds with field prep as well. Perks tested were Field Prep and Demolitionist, Field Prep and Full Court, Clown Cartridge, and finally Clown Cartridge with Full Court. Remembering everything is with spike grenades and a backup mag mod. So starting with Field Prep and Demolitionist. For this method, empty the first magazine of 7, throw a grenade to reload, and then immediately empty the second round of 7. Now reload while crouched to benefit from field prep and fire the remaining 4 rounds in the magazine. Damage per round is 19,751, meaning total damage for 18 rounds plus the Warlock's fusion grenade is 376,085. Time to do that is 11.08 seconds, therefore DPS is 33,943. Now it's field prep with full court. For this, you simply fire all rounds as normal, that being 2 magazines of 7, followed by a final magazine of 4, and ensure you're crouched when reloading. Full court increases damage the further away from the target you are, which for this example was at roughly 48 meters away from Carl. This brings damage per round to 23,572 and total damage for 18 to 424,296. Time to do this is 11.6 seconds, therefore DPS is 36,577. Now it's Clown Cartridge on its own. With no field prep, reserves drop to 16, but with a backup mag mod, you can hold a minimum of 8 in the magazine, meaning only 1 reload is required to fire all rounds. Damage is back to base numbers at 19,751, so total damage for 16 rounds is 316,016. Time to do this takes just 9.7 seconds, therefore DPS is 32,579. And finally, Clown Cartridge with full court. This is the same process as Clown Cartridge on its own, by which you just empty 2 magazines of 8. Damage due to full court is back up to 23,572 per round. Remember, that's tested at around 48 meters away, therefore total damage is 377,152. Less than field prep and full court due to having 2 less in reserves. Time to do this is 9.7 seconds, therefore DPS is 38,882. Numbers for this differ slightly from my last grenade launcher video, as there was a mistake in that with regards to the number of reserves. Reload times have changed and the damage against Carl is a little different compared to Greg, although full court could be playing a small part there as well. And onto the last grenade launcher, Berenger's Memory. This is a rapid fire frame and therefore fires at 150 RPM. It can hold 20 in reserves with nothing to boost that. Base magazine size is 5 but goes up to 7 with a backup mag mod, and base reload time was around 2.45 seconds. This was tested with only one perk combination, that being Pulse Monitor and Demolitionist. Of course, this also includes spike grenades, a backup mag mod, and a grenade launcher loader mod. For this method tested, fire 6 rounds at the target and then the final in the magazine at the floor in front of you to fully deplete your shield. Then empty the now fully reloaded magazine, which will be 7. When you've done that, throw a grenade to reload again and fire the remaining 6 rounds from the final magazine. Damage per round is 16,392. Total damage, taking into consideration the round fired at the ground to proc Pulse Monitor and the damage from the grenade, comes in at 332,015. Time to do this damage is 8.53 seconds, therefore DPS is 38,031. Now, this is a lot higher than previous testing with Berenger's memory, because for that video, and yeah, you guessed it, there was an error. I've calculated all numbers based on a magazine size of 6 in that video, not 7. Therefore, a 4th magazine is required to fire 20 rounds. It's my mistake, and I do apologise for that. But when you take that into consideration and the changes to loader mods, this is what's reduced the time massively. Total damage does remain the same though, as there was no difference in damage per round or grenade damage. Anyway, with all the weapons tested, let's take a look at them on the graph, starting with Battue with Pulse Monitor, and now with Clown Cartridge. So Pulse Monitor briefly falls behind when you fire that final round in the magazine at the ground, but then it comfortably pulls ahead while the Clown Cartridge variant is reloaded, but then falls behind again when reloading itself as normal. As with Clown Cartridge, all rounds can be fired with 2 magazines. The blue line right at the end may look like it's climbing a bit too quick, but as I briefly touched on in my Heritage Shotgun video, the numbers are actually correct, and there is a reason for that relating to the first round in a magazine. Now it's the Crowd Pleaser variants, those being Field Prep and Demolitionist, Clown Cartridge on its own, and Pulse Monitor with Demolitionist. The interesting point to take away here is, even though Pulse Monitor and Demolitionist has the highest DPS for this weapon when emptying reserves, it actually spends most of its time below Field Prep and Demolitionist. In fact, the latter is probably the best performing on the graph so far, spending a large chunk of time, around 4.5 seconds up to 7.5 seconds, basically ahead of everything. It does the most damage so far and doesn't really drop off behind any other combination currently on the graph for any meaningful amount of time. Just to point something out, the vertical lines are after reloading with Demolitionist, with the grenade and first round fired damage both occurring at the same time. Now to take a look at the 4 Interference 6 combinations, starting with Field Prep and Demolitionist, then Field Prep and Full Court, now Clown Cartridge, and finally Clown Cartridge with Full Court. For the variants without Full Court, it mirrors Crowd Pleaser with the same perks. The reason it falls behind gradually is due to Crowd Pleaser doing ever so slightly more damage per round, but as I've said, I believe this is just down to the velocity. The difference isn't that much, so it's not something I'd personally be worried about. Of course, with Field Prep, reserves for Interference 6 at 18, so it does do slightly more total damage than Crowd Pleaser. Clown Cartridge on its own, it's also very similar to Crowd Pleaser and Battue with that perk, and none of them are particularly great options compared to the others tested, spending a large amount of time from the 5 to 8 seconds below everything else. If there's any single thing to take away from these graphs, it's the importance of reload speed for DPS. Now with Field Prep and Full Court, it's a much stronger option. It still falls behind the Demolitionist and Pulse Monitor offerings around the mid-range, but pulls it back and does the most total damage in the test. Clown Cartridge with Full Court is also strong and is in the lead at the 4-second mark, but that long reload time of around 2.7 seconds causes it to fall behind and not pull ahead again until the last couple of rounds are fired. Clown Cartridge and Full Court may have the highest DPS for this weapon, but looking at the graph, I'd probably take Field Prep and Full Court instead, while also dealing more total damage. And finally, Berenger's memory now. This is a weapon that's always came out close at the top for DPS. It fires fast as it's 150 RPM. With the perks tested here, those being Pulse Monitor and Demolitionist, you don't need to reload normally to fire all 20 rounds, and it can still hold the same number of rounds in the magazine as a 120 RPM grenade launcher. But when you see the damage over time on the graph, it's not actually anything special. It's ahead of everything for a very brief moment, around 5 seconds, but that is it. Almost everywhere else, there are at least 2 grenade launchers that have done more damage at that point in time. DPS is so high with these perks simply because it can empty all rounds in a relatively short period of time. With the DPS number alone, you'd think it would perform much better than the other weapons and perks, but it just doesn't. I've said this before, but single DPS numbers on their own can be misleading. So what's the verdict? Well, they actually all have reasonably good DPS, some much better than others, but I don't really like using any of them. Pulse Monitor requires you to waste a round, and unless you're stood in something like a Warlock's Well, it's too easy to kill yourself, or not fire close enough to proc the perk at all. Clown cartridge is basically RNG, and although in some of these examples you're guaranteed to empty 16 rounds in 2 magazines, if you start using reserve mods, you might not be able to do that. Field prep is really good, but to benefit from the increased reload speed, you need to be crouched, which limits mobility. Full court is way too dependent on the distance from the target, and demolitionist is only an option if you have a grenade. Now, they are just my personal opinions though. If you like using these often and the perks that they come with, then keep doing it. You play the game how you want to play, you don't let me tell you. Once I've eventually stopped talking, I'm going to cycle through a few different graphs on screen, but showing each weapon on its own, to help compare the effects of each perk or perk combination on damage over time. Since Berenger's memory is on its own, I'll leave that on with each weapon. And on that note, it's everything from me. I hope you enjoyed the video and found it helpful. If you did, don't forget to like and subscribe, and leave any feedback or questions in the comments. As always, thank you very much for watching. I'll see you next time.